Welcome back to the Manage to Win podcast. I'm your host, David Russell. Today's episode is sponsored by Habitly.com. And, we're approaching year end now. Are you achieving all of your goals? We have a training in Habitly called Hit Your Targets. It teaches a proven method to set and achieve goals. And you don't want to miss it. Habitly.com teaches the habits of highly successful people. First 7 days free. How can you go wrong? Check it out. Today's episode is with Lauren Zajac. She is an attorney who's done some work on women doing better in business and having more equality. She also does some nonprofit work with the Soul Project with women and girls to have their voice and doing a lot of positive things. And we have a good conversation about, how some of us men can unconsciously be biased in how we interact with women and how in general, people don't adjust well to someone else's behavior. And that can cause some friction. Let's dive in. Lauren, it's great to have you on the show. You've got a great background and some interesting topics that you've suggested to talk about. So if you'll please introduce yourself to the audience, let them know about your background and some of your passions. Let's dive in.
Sure. Thanks so much for having me. I'm Lauren Zajac. I have spent my career being a general counsel or chief legal officer to various technology companies. I am a speaker and an author and am all about empowering leaders and especially women leaders.
Okay. And so talk about your book for a moment, because books are not easy to write. What motivated you to write that? And what change are you trying to bring about there?
It was not easy to write. It's certainly something that came sort of organically in the last few years of my career as I rose in the ranks and became a C-level executive. And I had been general counsel many times in companies where I was the only woman executive, the only woman in a team of managers. And I started to have I did a lot of mentoring, especially of women coming into business or looking to become a leader in some way. And I had a lot of those people say to me, you really, there's a lot of learning and a lot of sort of opening the doors to how to successfully be and operate in the executive or other levels, especially with the challenges that women face. And you should really bring that knowledge forward. And that was really the impetus for writing the book.
Well, that's great. And so, I'm Captain Clueless to a certain amount with this, with the gender equality, the women in business type of thing in a large corporation, because I've always been part of small organizations, maybe 50 employees, maybe 100, maybe 5 or 10. And I am just biased to find the right way to do something. Mm-hmm. So I don't care, what you look like. I don't care whether you're, purple with pink polka dots or, whatever your deal is, as long as we can work well together. So where are these things happening where women it sounds like, are not getting a fair shake, where there's kind of different standards or different pay? I'm sorry to sound so stupid or naive. I'm 65 years old. I shouldn't be naive. But to me, it's like, hey, if two people are in the same job and they're doing the same work, you pay them the same. If one's doing a little bit, doing more contribution that adds to the bottom line, whatever, they should get more. It shouldn't matter on gender. So I'm sorry. I guess I'm living in a little, No,
I wish more people had that approach, and you're not living in a bubble. And I will say, I've spent the majority of my career in kind of small to mid-sized business as well. To short answer the first question, where is it happening? I think it's happening everywhere, unfortunately. And one of, as I said, in my role, the general counsel, very oftentimes you are advising both the board and the CEO and the other C-level executives. And I have had the experience where I've been the only woman as part of the executive team, the only woman sort of advising the board. One of the places that I see that it happens, not just in my experience, but it's certainly I've talked to, lots of other women who have had this experience. And maybe it's more driven by my particular role, but one of the places that I think women have a hard time at navigating is kind of what tone to bring their opinion in. right? My job as a lawyer is always to give sort of straightforward, this is my advice, this is the law, this is how we should proceed. But oftentimes when women come to the table with an authoritarian sort of viewpoint, or here's the way forward without sort of booking any other options, there is a very negative feedback that they get, right? You're too bossy, or you're not taking other people's perspectives into consideration. That's a hard thing for women to balance. How do I sort of have a seat at the table? How do I continue to have a voice? And how do I walk the line of being sort of too rigid and too directive, and also taking other people's opinions into consideration? One of the things, I mean, I'm sure we've heard, Sheryl Sandberg and the Lean In book and some of the case studies underlying that. One of the things that she recommended, and I've certainly seen this done successfully, is that in a board meeting, if a female raises a point, other females are encouraged to sort of amplify that same point, such that it doesn't get swept away in the rest of the conversation. I certainly have seen that kind of situation arise lots of times in my own life and in others, in female colleagues that I know. So I do think it's sort of rampant. It's a difficult situation to be sort of truly authentic in a role where you're not sure how to walk the line. And that's a lot of what I talk about in my book and when I speak publicly. So,
of course, I come from this idealistic standpoint of treating everybody the same. And so, I have two questions. One is, Sandberg recommends that, other women, voice their support for whatever that is. What if they're not that knowledgeable about the thing that's being suggested? What if they may agree with part of it, not the other part? I mean, I'm diving down in the details a little bit, but I would say the same thing, if my buddy's voicing something, let's assume it's a guy thing, my buddy's voicing something, but I mean, I totally agree or whatever, but I'm supposed to support it because he's my buddy. I want to be careful that I'm also being true to my own integrity. So can you add a little bit more detail on that piece of it?
Yeah, sure. And certainly there are lots of situations where, this is one avenue to supporting other women in business. Not everyone is going to have the same expertise and be able to amplify or support a particular point. And frankly, I don't personally rely on that an awful lot. One of the things that I talk a lot about is how my career journey led me from sort of a place where I wasn't sure how to walk that line in a boardroom or a executive meeting, to finding my own true authentic place where I didn't need necessarily that support or amplification. And so I think it's certainly a personal journey, but you can't rely solely on that. I think you've got to find your own groove and your own vibe as an executive, as a person, as a human being, and then as a woman, and sort of have the convictions of what you're saying. And that's a lot of what I talk about in the book.
So I'd like to come back to that in a moment, but I want to go down this path of what's your experience been as far as, male men executives who either, is it conscious or unconscious bias because the woman is in the role what their pay should be, or the woman is in the role how much I listen to them?
I think I am a person that thinks the best of all people around me. So I think it's unconscious. I'll give you an example of something that's happened to me 2 or 3 different times in different roles. One of the, I think, parts of my job, right, the general counsel, the chief legal officer, that I think is really important is to have your ear to the ground, right? You don't want to be in a situation as a general counsel advising your legal team and your executives that you're sort of reacting to something that you weren't aware of. So it's really important to kind of pay attention, no matter what size company, what's happening, what are the rumblings under the surface, what are people talking about at the water cooler. So that's a skill that I've really worked on over the course of time. And that's obviously, it necessitates building trust with people and having people feel comfortable so that they tell you things that they otherwise would be whispering off in a corner about. I have had, in more than one occasion, brought something to a board or a CEO and had the response be, well, I don't understand why you're engaging in gossip. What exactly, does this mean to the business, right? That's the first blush response until you say, well, I'm bringing you this issue because it affects X, Y, and Z parts of our strategy, and you should know so we can be responsive to it.
Yeah, it's interesting. So the leaders basically, instead of saying, why is that happening? Tell me more, explain what's going on. They're kind of closing it down and blowing it off.
Right.
And it seems like, is that strictly because it's women, or is it because, or part of it because there's kind of an us versus them in their mind? I'm at C level and this is a low level, employee or something like that. So yes, it may be, in that case, it may be worse with women,
right?
But it may also be happening with the men.
It certainly could be the case, and that's just one example. But obviously, both have kind of negative implications for people who are trying to lead companies of all sizes. Right? The us versus them, whether it's a gender issue or not, is not, in my opinion, the right way to move forward unless you've got your finger on the pulse, especially in this day and age, right? Post-pandemic, where we're trying to attract people, where people are changing jobs all of the time. For any reason, for no reason, it's really important to kind of keep your finger on the pulse of those things that you wouldn't necessarily, as the CEO or someone else, have sight into.
Yeah, and it just seems that the metrics should be laid out for the desired outcomes in the position and how things are going, so you have a good understanding of the person that's going into the role and they have the capability, and then you're mentoring them, training them, whatever that's ongoing. I'm 65. I'm still learning. So I'm sorry. I totally agree that what you're saying is happening. Okay. So I'm not disputing it's not happening.
Yeah.
And just being an idealist, it just seems that is it possible that we're missing some training at the family level, at the school level, church level,
Sure,
whatever level, kind of training it young?
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, and this is why I think most of it is unconscious, right? I think this a lot, at least in my opinion, a lot of these kinds of situations arise in the corporate world, and they're a mirror of the training, the programming, the value system, right, that we come up through as we grow from kids through adolescence to adults. It's why one of the things that I do outside of my kind of day-to-day work is some nonprofit work that really helps to shift that perspective, at least with girls. And I'm really interested in exposing girls of all backgrounds and resource situations to technology, to that whole STEM world. I think the more that we can do sort of some normalizing, right? That it's just because you're a girl doesn't mean you take this path. Just because you're a boy doesn't mean you take this path. The more we can equalize in childhood and make every opportunity available to every kid, I think the better, because I do think there's some of that just flows through.
Yeah, and I think we'd be such a stronger nation if we taught kids soft skills, including respecting differences.
100%.
Yeah. So I don't think boys in particular are being trained, particularly nowadays. High school is toxic. Public high school, for the most part, is toxic. And I don't know that private's that much better. And then you move into more of a secluded environment, with the homeschool type of thing or virtual. But I don't think boys are being taught how to interact with someone who's different, first of all. And second of all, particularly a female who's different, who, however you want to describe the differences, someone was on a podcast the other day, my podcast was talking about, in general, females tend to be more relational and males tend to be more, I don't know what the word was, competitive or something, but right. Doers, problem solvers. So, and it was emphasizing it was a generality, but we're not taught how to adjust ourselves, adjust our behaviors so we can engage productively, respectfully, humbly, yet effectively with other people. And that's part of the reason we have habitly.com. It teaches soft skills. Because I got asked by so many clients, Dave, will you create, it was funny, it was originally, Dave, will you create Charm School for IT geeks? But it kind of works for everybody because, so how do we go about solving this, Lauren? Because it's not just on the women's side that they should have to bear the burden. A lot of these soft skills go for both women and men. You brought up, asking questions, or when you're shot down in a meeting, how do you handle that in a productive way? And so what do we do to solve this problem? I'm all about problem solving.
Yeah. I don't know that there's an easy solution. Obviously, this is a big question that lots of people are talking about. If you're in a situation where you are dealing with a colleague or a coworker that doesn't necessarily have the soft skills, that's sort of where I can talk about, because that's been a lot of my experience. One of the things that, certainly you're not going to teach someone soft skills at that point unless they themselves want to take on that journey. But one of the things that's really worked well for me, and it's interesting, this kind of came to me, my previous company is an employee recognition company. And so I lived the employee recognition and connection and authenticity world for almost 15 years. And I really sort of adopted a part of that into my own personal approach in dealing with, say my opinion was shot down, or you kind of sort of have it out with someone in a meeting and in a way that's not really professional. I really worked hard and have built the ability to sort of connect, approach someone and build a connection with that person such that you can get to the next level and maybe model some soft skills. That's how I would describe it. I've certainly had lots of situations, especially in my role, that are sort of adversarial with someone, and after the fact, sort of knocked on the door or met them in the kitchen and said, "Hey, can we talk about X, Y, and Z? Like, bring it off the topic and try to find some area of commonality, some place where there can be a connection, such that you can move the relationship to the next level, and then have hopefully some ability to say, hey, like that maybe wasn't the right way. That made me feel like X, Y, and Z. Maybe this was a way we could handle it next time." I think only in those spot moments where you have interactions that maybe cross your boundaries, or maybe you could suggest a different way forward, we can change over the course, cumulatively over the course of time, some of these things where people don't have the skills that they should have to deal with in the professional world.
Yeah, it's interesting. And I know you do the Soul Project, I think was the nonprofit that you're doing. Yeah. So, and I would just like to make a call out to parents to really encourage parents to help their kids learn soft skills, to understand how to get along with people who are different than them. And I'm not just talking different gender or different heritage where they may look a little different, but I'm talking about their behavior's different. It may even be a behavior that irritates you. I want to move really fast. You want to move really slow. I talk really fast and want to make quick decisions. You want a lot of data. You want a detail. You want to do it once and do it right. And if you're just going to go head to head on these things, it's going to be very unproductive. And teach your kids how to work with people that have some different behaviors and how to be fair. Sorry, I'm just caught up with the teenage thing because I have teenagers.
So I have kids. I feel your pain. I have one's a senior in high school and two are entering high school this year. So I feel your pain.
Yeah. And I feel the pain for, in the local high school here, well, we have several, but one of them that is kind of the high-end school. Beautiful school, great school, 2,000 kids. But the girls can be incredibly mean. Oh, yeah. And most of the boys are watching porn. And, so they have a totally distorted view of how to engage with girls. And it's very toxic. And so then you bring that into the workplace. So so help me. I want to go back to how do we help people get along better, more productively in the workplace. I know part of your background is gratitude, and you brought up a key word, authentic. Fake gratitude we see a lot of these days. Yeah, and for leaders to understand that doing something that's gratitude, thankful, and then turning around and treating someone disrespectfully or not listening to their opinion or paying them differently or whatever it might be, what do we do? I mean, this, as you said, this is a huge problem. What's one thing? Give me one thing. What's the tipping point thing?
Yeah, for me, especially before the pandemic, but certainly it helped through the pandemic. For me, it was, to your point, looking at this concept of authenticity. I have run in the course of my career lots of teams of lawyers. You can imagine that lawyers are not, and I can say it because I'm a lawyer, not always the touchy-feely, like I want to tell you what's going on in my life kind of people. But I made a really big effort. And I had a terrific team as we went through the pandemic, and a lot of this worked really well. But even before that, as I said, I made a big point of, right, I'm a single mom. I have 3 teenagers, right? I'm constantly in this working mom mode where I'm balancing, like, where am I present in the job? Am I present at home? Where am I supposed to be driving? All of these things. And I knew that a lot of my team a lot of them were young parents or sort of midlife parents. And so I made a conscious effort, and probably like 3 years ago, to say, I'm going to share some struggle that maybe people will identify with, or maybe they won't, but at the very least, it'll make me seem more human because I'm sharing what's going on, not just on our Zoom calls, every check-in that we had every week. And the results were amazing. I mean, as I said, it really helped when we got into the pandemic and you were seeing people's cats and kids and all sorts of things. But even before that, just sharing that, look, today was really difficult. At the last minute, I got this conference call with the CEO, and I was waiting at pickup line, and one of my girls was getting out of school and got in a fight with someone and was crying in the background. And like, I don't know about you guys, but this is a really hard thing to balance. It sort of cracked open something and created such a bond in the team where then everyone sort of started sharing, well, like, oh, I had this situation, and oh, this is a similar thing, but not exactly the same thing. And I had a hard day because I'm struggling with my parent who's sick. And it's just, I think authenticity, sort of creating some vulnerability, especially as leaders with the people that you lead, is the place to start. Without that, it becomes sort of robotic, and there is no opportunity to connect. There's no opportunity to learn from one another. And then you never get to the place where you can appreciate and by the way, express real gratitude for differences and be inclusive of those differences.
Yeah, I want to emphasize a few things that you said, and that is that so I teach a one-on-one type of meeting style where you work through, the commitments that you made and what new information, blah, 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 do we have? And okay, out of that, we come with a plan. So we call it a MAP, metrics adjustments plan. It comes from reading Lee Iacocca's autobiography, where he would retreat to his study and plan how to keep Chrysler alive. So, but I really like, so I had that set up, and about a year or two ago, somebody pointed out I didn't have the personal check-in at the start of the meeting. You're doing a one-on-one, but type A personality, it's like, okay, let's drive. And I was like, wow, that makes perfect sense. Because a few years ago, I stopped automatically answering good or great when somebody said, how are you doing? Somebody says, how are you doing? I shock them. I shock some people because I'll say, today's been really rough.
Yeah.
I'll make it, but it's been really rough.
Mm-hmm.
Oftentimes I won't go into detail, but at least I've been transparent. I'm just like, hey, today was a bummer. And the flip side of that is really important that you brought up or alluded to. And that is, be prepared for a two-way conversation. Your listening is actually equally, if not more so, important to your being transparent on the front end. And so you have to kind of be prepared for that. And also, I would assume, particularly because you're an attorney, you also have to be aware there's certain limits on how deep you're going to go, how personally you're going to go, or how personally you're going to let them go.
Of course.
Yeah, because some people, you open them up and they'll take 2 hours of your time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because they really do have some things going on, or they just spin with stuff. So maybe talk about that a little bit here too, just so they understand there's some balance in how you do this, but it's very critical if you're going to bond well with people.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I certainly will do that. I think one of the things that you said that resonated with me too is the listening piece. Before we get there, it's one of the things people have always, right. Again, I'll make a lawyer not really joke, but lawyers like to hear themselves talk. I am guilty of it just as much as every other one. And one of the things that I did really early on in my career was sort of school myself in being more of a listener than just ready to give the answer right off the bat. And I think that's really dovetailed well into this practice of listening, paying attention to in a meeting to the body language, the things that aren't said, the things that are sort of energetic, if you will. So I really love that. But I think with respect to your specific question, it's hard to sort of encourage people to open up and to be vulnerable with one another and to encourage authenticity without sometimes, as you said, going too far. I think I haven't had as much of a problem with that. I think because I'm already overcoming this. Well, you're the chief lawyer, and like, should I be telling you any of this stuff? And so there's a little bit of that. But I think it's really just an exercise like we do in our personal lives of really kind of being clear about your boundaries, being clear about where you want to go and where you want to stop. And then when it gets to that point, we're in this authentic exchange. Okay, we're going to leave it right there and move on to the next thing. That you don't have to make a big deal of it. People will get the point once you've done that once or twice, at least in my experience.
Yeah. Yeah. So what do you think are the biggest opportunities for women that you're seeing in the marketplace today moving forward?
There are so many. Certainly
That's good news.
Yes, that's good news. I have sort of tunnel vision because I'm in my industry, but I'm seeing a lot of really good opportunities for in-house practice for women. I work, obviously, I have a lot of law firms in my employ, in my job. And I think the major law firms, at least in the US, in this country, have done a lot to address the equal pay issue and to shore up some of that disparity and to bring sort of more balanced work-life policies in place. So I think that's going to give a lot more opportunities to women and to anyone who is sort of struggling with raising a family or being available for their children or adult parents, et cetera. So I think there's lots of opportunities there. I'm just really, I'm just overjoyed to see that there is these soft skills, as you call them. And I think it's going even more than that. And I was living in a world where we were talking about authenticity and vulnerability and gratitude all the time. So I saw a lot more of that. But bringing this other part, this human aspect into the workplace, and we're even seeing it in big corporations being concerned about things like climate and how to support their employees with employee resource groups. All of these things, I think, mean terrific opportunities for all people, but certainly for women who, as we talked about earlier in the conversation, sort of make decisions relationally and are really interested in the kind of culture that they will live in a workplace. So I think it's really encouraging to see what's happening in the corporate world.
Well, that's good. That's good. I'm really glad to hear that. And what do you think's driving that change? Is it just increased awareness? So people
Yeah. I think a lot of these things have been around long enough that you would have thought that there would have been a blending before. But I do think, right, as much as you can say, and with both of us having teenagers, I'm sure we feel this way, social media has its negative aspects. There are aspects that are positive in that more information, right? We're sharing more information than ever before. And so there is more awareness of these different kinds of practices that can be brought into any opportunity, but a corporate opportunity or culture. There is more awareness of our connection. Certainly coming out of the pandemic, there was never a situation that showed how connected we all were. And I think that's a big driver as well. So I think
And I think it's a whole nother podcast, the pandemic and its effect, and not only to emphasize to some people that were connected, but others who fell into the mode of condemning one another and becoming disconnected instead of just respecting differences.
Right.
And that was a challenge, but we don't have to go there. So if people want to get in touch with you, Lauren, or please, you did not mention the name of your book earlier. Please do that now. But where would they get in touch with you? And please talk about the book a little bit as we close out here.
Oh, sure. The book is really just a sort of an encapsulation of some of the things we've talked about today. My particular journey in finding how to be my authentic self in a corporate world, in a corporate role, especially as an attorney, the things that have worked tremendously for me, as we talked about, being vulnerable with the people that you lead with and that you lead. And there's some other practices. I am a huge meditator. I meditate every single day, and what that journey was like and how I brought that to bear on my practice and in my corporate life. And how I am the biggest proponent, and even though people sometimes still call me woo-woo, and how can a lawyer be talking about meditation? But it's a huge part of what I credit my success with. And so you can find me at I am the Lauren Zajac, and I have all of my information on my LinkedIn profile as well.
That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. I think we kind of talked about the tip of the iceberg. But I encourage people to really consider this conversation, maybe consider your book, and think about, are we really have a level playing field here in our organization? And what can we do to develop each individual based on their strengths and move that forward? But thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning in today. If you like the episode, Lauren, please subscribe, leave us a comment or a rating. Love to hear back from you. Don't forget our sponsor, Habitly.com, for 7 days free. Learn those essential people skills to be the best you can be. And stay tuned. We got more great guests coming. Bye for now.